I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, June 16th, 2020, and the Portland Board of Public Education is meeting virtually through Zoom. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson.
Here.
Mr. Balfon.
Here.
Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Figdor.
Here.
Ms. Morioni.
Here.
Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Trevorrow.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Mr. Casiel Reyes. Ms. Habib Zahi. Mr. Parrott. Ms. Yangala.
Présente, I'm here.
And Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. Would everyone please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag is going to be shown on the screen, and then I'll unmute us so we can all side along. We'll wait for the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to just really quickly go over our procedures for board meetings on a Zoom, our Zoom protocol. So just to remind everyone of how we're doing this, all votes are going to be taken by roll call, and the superintendent has been helping us with that. Committee members or school board members are going to use the raise the hand feature found by selecting in the participants at the bottom of the participant screen in the sidebar, or in the pull-down menu found by selecting on the three little dots in the participant's video window. Should they wish to address the board, the chair will acknowledge the speaker. Committee members should lower their hands when they finish speaking. Again, any opportunity for public comment will be announced. Members of the public will also use the raise your hand feature provided by Zoom, and this feature is either found on the webinar control bar at the bottom of your screen, or it can be found by selecting your name on the participant screen. I will call the Zoom name or your screen name that is shown in the list of attendees. And you will have 3 minutes to comment. Should the speaker, should the 3-minute mark near, we'll address the speaker to let them know that their time is soon to be over, and we could add, or rather grant an additional 3 minutes if necessary. If additional time is granted, at the end of the 6 minutes, the speaker's microphone will be muted. I'm happy to, if and when we deal with any issues with either public comment or Zoom technical issues, I'm happy to address them. So I'll invite folks to please use the chat window to let us know of that, and either one of us that are designated hosts can address concerns or issues that people are having. Next, for the report of the chair, I unfortunately cannot find the notes that I made for myself, but I just wanted to acknowledge we arrived at the end of the school year, finally. And I think I don't want to go over this one more time. I think we all acknowledge the incredible challenges that we've experienced through the last few months of the school year with remote learning and everything that not just our students, but of course our staff and our students' families have been dealing with the pandemic. And so it was certainly far from ideal, the way that we concluded our school year. And certainly we've talked a lot about the challenges that this presents to us moving forward. And again, I don't want to take too much time away from that. And I'm pretty sure that the superintendent will probably speak to it in his remarks in a few moments. So I'll move us along. The student report tonight, we were due for a path report, but I don't believe that we have that prepared for us tonight. So we'll move on to the report of the superintendent. Mr. Botana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin my comments today by recognizing the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes known collectively as the Wabanaki, or people of the Dawnland. We're honored to have their children among our students today. Today, we are celebrating and recognizing young Rose Baldock, a soon-to-be 8th grader at Lincoln Middle School who was recently crowned state spelling bee champion for the state of Maine. Is Rose with us?
Yes. Yeah, I am. Hello.
Hi, Rose.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Rose won the statewide competition that was held just like this meeting and so much of other aspects of public life. Wouldn't you know it, via Zoom. Along the way, though, Rose won the Cumberland County Spelling Bee, which gave her the right to compete at the state level. In the Battle of the Spellers, Rose was resilient in a back and forth seesaw battle with, among others, last year's state champion and runner-ups. Rose outlasted her worthy opponents in a 32-round battle of the spellers to win the competition on June 4th. Rose's winning word was opine. Incidentally, something that my wife says I'm very good at. I don't know how to spell it, but because of the COVID-19 cancellation, state champions unfortunately will not be allowed to travel to DC for the national competition, which has been canceled. But there's always next year. As you know, it's unusual for 7th graders to walk away with a championship, but because of that, Rose will have the opportunity to defend her title next year and hopefully get to compete at the national level. So as you know, Rose is here with us today, along with her parents, Sean Baldock and Emily Wiegert. And Rose, as I said, we're so very proud of you and your accomplishments. Your teachers, Ms. Briley, Mr. Santoro, they're proud of you, and your principal, Ms. Santiago, is also proud of you. I would even venture to say that they're exhilarated, but because I wouldn't know how to spell it, but I'm sure you do. So Sean and Emily, I'm sure you're equally proud of Rose. Thank you for raising her to be an avid reader and learner. I know that she couldn't achieve all that she's been able to achieve without your advocacy and support for her.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You bet. We will send you a commemorative certificate in the mail, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime next year. So take this summer to stay engaged in reading, and reading. I look forward to watching your title defense next year. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything, Rose?
Well, sure. Okay. It was a very difficult journey to get to where I got to today. It took a lot of studying and reading, but with perseverance and hard work, I managed to get there somehow. Paid off, definitely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're so proud of you. Congratulations. So yesterday, the City Council voted to approve the school board's approved budget of $119.9 million. That was the next to last step in the budget process for this year. And as you know, the budget now goes to Portland voters on July 14th. I would like to thank the City Council for their partnership in finalizing a budget that allows us to maintain our services and supports, advance some of our key priorities, and not raise the tax burden for our community in light of the financial uncertainty that's facing us. I'm particularly grateful to City Finance Chair Nick Navadonis for working with our Finance Committee Chair Anna Trevorrow to orchestrate a predictable and thoughtful budget process. I would be remiss if I did not also take a moment to thank Miranda Fasulo, our Executive Director of Budget and Finance. This was Miranda's first budget process in Portland, and I've heard nothing but compliments from board members, counselors, and members of the public for her work. So thank you, Miranda, and thank you to all of the board for their work on this process. I'm hopeful that Portland voters will come out to support this budget as they consistently do. There will continue to be uncertainty in the months ahead as we grapple with the implications of the coronavirus on our schools and community. And we expect that next year will be every bit as challenging as this year. But I know that with the support of the board and the partnership with the council and city manager, John Jennings, that we will be able to continue to provide outstanding education to our current and future Portland citizens. Later tonight, during our board focus on educational issues, we'll provide the board an in-depth look at our equity work as a district. It's gratifying to see the surge of interest in ensuring that we make up for the inequities of hundreds of years of disparities and injustice and move aggressively to be more equitable and just as a school system. I look forward to sharing our update with board members and the public during that section of the agenda. One of my favorite traditions of this season is Portland's Pride Parade and celebration. It was my very first official activity arriving in Portland, and every year since, I've watched in awe as our staff, board members, and students have come together to march proudly on behalf of our LGBTQ students and staff. Because of the pandemic, there will be no parade, but I would like to take this opportunity to remind our staff and students that Portland Public Schools prides itself in being inclusive and supportive of our students, regardless of gender identification. Our gender expansive policy is an example of this Board of Education leading through policy and signaling clearly through its actions a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So while the joyous parade will eventually come back, I want to reaffirm our commitment as a district to maintaining and furthering our efforts to create a safe, welcoming, and nurturing environment for our LGBTQ students and staff. As Chair Rodriguez mentioned, Friday marked the last day of the 2019-20 school year for students. It was a remarkably difficult year and one that I venture to say none of us will ever forget. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone, from our staff to our students to our families, for your resilience, grit, compassion, and patience in this incredible year. I could not be prouder of the work that we've done together, and I look forward to what will be another challenging year. Working together, we can and will overcome anything that comes our way. This week, we will be communicating with families in more detail about our plans for reopening schools. Those plans are included in your board packet under the superintendent's remarks section. We also have several work groups that will continue to work over the summer to make sure that we're prepared for the start of the 2020-2021 school year in whatever shape it will wind up taking. I'm grateful to the almost 2,500 parents and students who have provided us feedback on their remote learning experiences, preferences, and concerns for next year, and otherwise have provided important feedback to our school reopening team. And I am grateful to Assistant Superintendents Malia Nally and Aaron Townsend for their work leading our reopening design team, and to the full team and all of the others who have provided guidance and feedback to their work. Also included in the board packet in this section is a memorandum outlining our responses to the previous discussions with the board around athletic team co-ops. Based on the feedback that we received from you during the workshop, staff has decided that we will bring any future co-op decisions to the board for your approval. The memorandum explains that we do not plan to co-op golf next year based on a variety of factors. And it also outlines the information that you should expect to receive from the administration whenever we make a co-op recommendation. We will convert those bullet points into an administrative procedure to enshrine them in our policy manual. And as you can see, the memo also previews which sports are under consideration for future co-oping and the timeline of those decisions. Finally, this is our last regularly scheduled board meeting for this term. We're planning to have a special board meeting on June 30th, so 2 weeks from tonight, to consider the resolution that is on tonight's agenda for a first reading, workshop, and public hearing. Then the board will be on a July hiatus and will resume business meetings on August 4th. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm still having some issues here with my big computer, so I'm trying to look at the agenda. I know we're up for the report of the secretary, but I'm not able to look at the minutes. Consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of June 2nd, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Ms. Thompson, second by Ms. Bondo. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, any board discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of June 2nd, 2020, please indicate, and we'll do it through a roll call. Superintendent will call us.
Mr. Atkinson,
Yes.
Mr. Balfons,
Yes.
Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Figdor,
Yes.
Ms. Morioni,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
Ms. Trevorrow,
Yes.
Ms. Yangala, she may not be here,
She's there.
and Chair Rodriguez.
Yes, I fixed my issues over here. Next, for the consent items, will the superintendent please read the list of donations made to the district?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district required by that policy. All of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude, as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value, and historical or commemorative significance. And the beneficiaries and contributors for this meeting are Nathan Aronson, donated $250 for Rose School families with food insecurity. Nancy Harrison and Jane Clayton donated $350 to help buy pre-K students books for home learning, also at Rowe. And finally, Bangor Savings Bank donated $500 to purchase books for pre-K summer learning packets. And we are very grateful for their generous support and contributions to the work of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, for the excuse me, for the board focus of educational issues, we're going to have a update on the Portland Promise Equity Strategy. Superintendent, do you want to set us up for this?
Yes. Tonight's board focus is an update on our equity work. We would like to spend some time today reviewing our overall strategy and the work that has happened to date to bring this strategy to life. A critical review of our pace and prioritization, and a look at where we need to go from here. The timing on this review is not coincidental, of course. As a result of the events following the killing of George Floyd on Memorial Day, our whole country is in a moment of reckoning on the profound inequities that exist in all of our institutions, including our schools. The Portland Promise, now 3 years old, recognize that the degree to which we're capable of leveling the playing field for all of our students who have special needs, who are English language learners, who are homeless, and who are poor, will be the marker of our success. As I often say, as a community, as a school system, we should define ourselves by how we are able to lift the least among us. The goal is purposely written in strong language. It says, PPS is vigilant in supporting each and every student's particular path to achieving high standards, rooting out systemic or ongoing inequities. But I think it's fair to say that in spite of that language, we have not always been as vigilant as we could be. And we certainly haven't rooted out those systemic and ongoing inequities, even when we recognize them. Paul Gorski, a writer on equity matters, cautions us against what he calls equity detours. The first of those detours is one that I grapple with a lot, and more so in the last couple of weeks, and that's the pacing for privilege detour. Gorski says, and I quote, this detour underlies the other detours. It speaks to the situation wherein an equity approach coddles the hesitancies of people with the least racial equity investment while punishing people with the most investment. He goes on to say that in these settings, quote, the pace of equity progress prioritizes the comfort and interests of people who have the least interest in that progress, and is designed to accommodate the feelings and fears of white educators in, quote, difficult, end quote, conversations about race rather than to advance equity for students of color, end quote. As we discuss our work today, it's fair to ask me, to what extent are we pacing for privilege in our work? That is increasingly the question that we must ask ourselves. Our students have one chance, their time with us. If we're unwilling to challenge ourselves around our pacing, we need to at least acknowledge that, and acknowledge that in doing that, we're sacrificing their equity to accommodate our fears and feelings. In the past couple of weeks, we have all seen new voices rise to call on us to move faster and with less accommodation. I hope that those voices will hunker down and be with us for the long haul. We did not get here in a day, and we won't remedy those inequities that exist in a day, a week, or a year. This has been our work for the past 3 years under the Portland Promise, and we will be continuing it into the future. I'm cognizant of the importance of urgency as a constant rather than as a reaction to today's events. Tonight, our Director of Equity and Inclusion, Barrett Wilkinson, will be coordinating our presentation, assisted by many of our team members. It is important to understand that Barrett's position is not enshrined in our budget. Their work, critical as it is to the district, is patched together year to year with grants. But as you'll see, without Barrett's focus, passion, and energy, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today. Making Barrett's position a recognized priority is something that we must commit to doing if we are serious about this work. You will also hear from Grace Valenzuela today. The work that Grace does today is squarely at the center of our equity work. Grace leads our community engagement and partnerships work along with communications. Grace was also one of the first people that I met when I came to interview in Portland. And I recognized immediately that Grace was a one-person army. For years, Grace has led a guerrilla operation to speak for those with soft voices. Grace recognized that our system was not set up to recognize the potential of our immigrant students, which led to the establishment of the Make It Happen. Under her leadership, it became a way to give our high potential immigrant students the guidance, the resources, and the social capital to develop academic portfolios that make them competitive at the highest levels. And she did it on the side with little systemic support. She begged, borrowed, and begged and borrowed some more to patch together this amazing resource. I don't think anyone in the district today would question the value of Make It Happen, but it wasn't until we prioritized it in FY18 that we actually funded the positions that do the work, and we did not achieve full staffing of it until this current fiscal year. Grace also established the Multilingual Multicultural Center as more than an interpretation center. She recruits, supports, and as a result has created a team of people from our local language communities to embed themselves back in those communities, understand their needs, and go beyond interpretation to become community leaders, advocates, and our conscience as a school system. Again, she did that on the side. To this day, as an organization, we still fail to recognize and reward the true value of our multilingual department to the organization. They are among the lowest placed staff in the district, and as such, among the worst compensated. But if you were to give an equity MVP award for work during these past 3 months, there would be no doubt in my mind that this team would be the winner, hands down. And that's why this also has to be a priority if we're going to commit to putting equity at the center of our district's work. Grace can always be counted on to be the truth teller. She is incredibly forgiving of the weaknesses of those around her, especially me, but she never veers for 1 second from the course of her conscience and commitment. Thank you, Grace, for being our equity warrior. Continue to push us, continue to inspire us, and continue to hold the flame for a more just system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Barrett.
Thank you, Javier, for the introduction and for your leadership. It is inspiring and really important to me to get to be a part of an organization that is always looking to reflect and always striving to do better. And so I'm really grateful to you and to Grace and to the other presenters that will be joining us tonight to help do this update. And thanks to all of you on the board. I think you'll see lots of places during this where the board work has or will intersect with our priority goals. And so thank you for all that you're doing. I know it has been a very difficult few months for all of us. So it's nice to see you all. I'm going to share my screen in just a moment, but my goal of our hope with this presentation tonight is to give you both an update on the equity goal, but also to provide some broader context and a bit of a timeline of sorts to show where we've been and also to talk a little bit about where we're going. So let me get my screen shared with you. All right, someone give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so I'm using Prezi, which is a little different style. So if there's any issues, just someone tell me to stop. But I really wanted this to start with talking about the foundation to begin the timeline about where we've been. So of course we're using a boat here in a lighthouse because that is sort of the style we go with. So I'm not sure what the foundation of a boat is, what it starts with. I've never built a boat, but as Javier mentioned, Grace Valenzuela is very core to some of the foundation. And so I actually want to turn it over to her to speak to some of the elements that built some of our equity foundation that precede many of us. So Grace.
Thank you, Barrett. The Multilingual and Multicultural Center in its early history in Portland Public Schools was called Multilingual Program, Multilingual Office. It was established by the program director, Grace Studley, in the early 80s when the district saw the arrival of refugees from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. In the 80s and through the 90s, the US Department of Education had resources for competitive grant funds in its bilingual education program. And Multilingual was a beneficiary. We were highly successful in winning those grants despite our low numbers of multilingual students compared to a Long Beach school district or a Boston public schools. The bilingual grants had specific supplemental areas that they wanted funded school districts to address. And we focus our attention on those areas as a grantee. One, after school summer support program for ELS, and that is, if you can think of Make It Happen as part of that. Professional development of teachers and staff in how best support the academic achievement of multilingual students. And third, parent involvement, which includes language access, translation, interpretation, cultural brokering. That is our parent community specialist structure. For over 2 decades, other than the L teachers in the schools, the district had very little local money invested in staffing supplemental programs to support its English learners and their families. The Multilingual Center's management structure, our program offerings and support were grant directed rather than directed from within the district leadership and in alignment with the district overall goals. With NCLB, the No Child Left Behind, competitive grants eventually dried up, and it took the district 10 years to fully allocate resources to support the work of the Multilingual Center. The Multilingual Center offered, when we got these grants for many decades, on average, we offered 20 workshops a year for teachers. They mostly happened after school. They were drive-by workshops and were never mandated except for a workshop on the LAO plan, the district's policy on meeting the educational needs of ELS. We produced monthly language and cultural bulletin to assist teachers in their practice, and also partnered with USM to offer credit courses for those who were interested in acquiring an L endorsement. We also offered about 10 workshops a year for multilingual parents. At the core of our work, of the work of our parent community specialists, is family engagement, connecting schools and families to ensure that they are strong partners of each other in the support and in the education of multilingual children and youth. All these years, up to the arrival of Superintendent Butana, I must confess that I was not going to use the word guerrilla. I was going to use the word rogue. I was a rogue administrator. I did not wait for leadership from central office to address what the L teachers and I saw as critical needs of multilingual learners. We did what we could do, knowing that the work to transform practice cannot be done by one marginalized department. To do nothing was not an option. If we want equity in outcomes, we needed the district to spearhead the work. We also need building leaders, teachers, and every staff member in alignment with our equity goal, which requires willingness to critically examine our individual and collective work and actions. With Superintendent Butana's leadership and aided by his very strong and competent cabinet members and guided by the goals of the Portland Promise, we could get there. I turn it back to you, Barrett.
Thank you, Grace. I think that there are a number of other things here that we, in preparing for this presentation, sort of reflected on that are core and foundational to what has led to where we're at now and what led to the development as equity as a primary goal. So some of these things included Portland Powered's work and the launch and release of the Parent Manifesto, which was in and around 2015. In 2015 as well, but launched with the first cohort in 2016, was a course that I know many of you have heard about, which was started by 2 Portland Public Schools educators, Julia Hazel and Fiona Hopper. Fiona is with us and will tell you about some of the other work later. But, you know, this started back in 2016 and is an in-depth course for our educators to help really advance their learning. And, you know, there's always been high demand for it. And it's been this year that we're able to have 2 facilitation teams ready to go to be able to lead this, you know, essentially like a 40-hour graduate style course. But that came from the leadership of a staff of color partnering with a white staff member, which is how the training is always led. Also in and around 2016, a group of people got together to start talking about what it would mean to help more people enter the profession of teaching from traditionally marginalized communities that might not have considered that as an option. And that led to the launch of Teach Portland, which we'll provide some update on as well. And so all of this filters in, along with a lot of other things, into the work that happened with the board and with the greater Portland Public Schools community to identify equity as a primary goal. And so I think all of this, I reflect on a lot of this, as well as Grace's leadership and expertise, you know, as really what sets the stage and creates more readiness for all that comes after. So now I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Nally to really kind of put it in the context of once the Portland Promise was adopted and what were some of the key parts of this kind of trajectory to understand.
Great. Thank you, Barrett. Can you hear me okay? All right. So yeah, with the launch of the Portland Promise, one of the first moves we made was to create a role dedicated to ensuring we held our diversity, equity, and inclusion work front and center across all of our goal areas, schools, and departments. And in deciding to create that role, we had very explicit conversations about the fact that we did not see the work of equity as just one person's job. We believed, and we still do, that every role should take an equity lens and orientation. With that said, we recognize that despite there being an acknowledgement of opportunity gaps, the district had not made deep systemic change with an emphasis on equity, and our results were stagnant. And so we wanted to ensure there was someone helping to keep us all accountable to the work by providing support and helping to make connections. We envisioned a role that would help ensure coherence across the systemic strategy, and that we intended to touch all parts of the organization. So we went out and engaged local foundations, as the superintendent mentioned, and that helped us establish Barrett's role, which is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Also at the beginning of the Portland Promise, we pulled together a group which we called the Cultural Responsiveness Work Group. This was a diverse group of educators, parent community specialists, and administrators whose charge was to start envisioning a comprehensive equity strategy. This group was focused on activating a district-wide professional development series, and together shaped what has become the beginning of the scope and sequence for our district-wide PD equity series around equity literacy. And then around that time, we met with a group of Indigenous leaders, many from nations within the Wabanaki Confederacy, along with Fiona Hopper, a teacher at Reiki at the time, who you'll hear from in a moment and was referenced earlier, and Bridget Neptune, a parent of 2 students in our district and a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe. This group was coming to urge us to take action on our legal and moral obligation to teach Wabanaki studies, which was established as an expectation via the 2001 law frequently referred to as LD 291, in which we had yet to take action on as a district. This group was aware that we had adopted equity as one of our key goals and saw this as an opportunity to hold us accountable to evaluating our curriculum and finally teaching Wabanaki studies as a part of the core. That meeting led to a deep process of collaboration, which you'll learn more about, and to the creation of a new teacher leader role on the academic team, whose primary focus was and is social studies content with a focus on Wabanaki studies. We were able to find grant money to fund this role, and it remains fully grant funded like our equity director position. And then finally, as we were making moves to center equity in our strategy, we recognized the importance of distributed leadership over the work. We made 2 deliberate moves to begin the foundation for this shared leadership. First, we established what we now refer to as the Equity Leaders Cohort. This was an outgrowth of the original work group that I mentioned and was formed with educators from every school. This group's primary charge was to help lead our systems level professional development effort. And second, we made equity-oriented reflection and PD a central focus for our work with administrators. We began to dedicate a day of admin retreats to this work and brought the team through a version of the internal race course taught by two of the founding teachers, Fiona and Alberto Morales. We engaged in a process of reflection and feedback supported by the Maine intercultural communication consultants. We brought several other reflective learning experiences to the team throughout the years, such as a set of equity simulations, training on our equity hiring toolkit, experiences with Wabanaki Reach Workshop, among many other experiences. And again, the idea behind all of this was to ensure our leadership team was modeling the type of reflective practice we were expecting from everyone in the district. So I'm going to pass it back over to Barrett and Barb, who are going to speak to some of the moves we made in alignment with our people goal to center our equity commitment.
Thank you, Malia. So I hope you're starting to see already the ways in which the equity goal really lives and breathes everywhere. And I will say, as the person with equity in my title, I do not feel that it is all on my shoulders. The people goal is a big bucket of the equity work. And one of those elements that some of you may recall was launched last year is the equity hiring toolkit. And subsequent training for all hiring managers that accompanies it. So the equity hiring toolkit is really the foundational document now for all hiring. It includes everything from resume review rubrics to questions that are centered around equity and cultural responsiveness in the classroom to help anyone who's doing hiring really ask those questions during the hiring process, because that is all central to getting the most qualified people to work in the best school district. So I did a mini audit this spring of last year's hiring to really understand how much of the toolkit had been put in place. It was sort of a sample audit, and I found that there was a great deal of evidence of the hiring toolkit even just after the first year of implementation, the first hiring season of implementation. So for example, like I mentioned, the questions that are provided in the toolkit as options that hiring managers can pull from to ask candidates, I saw wide use of those to really drive toward finding the candidates who can answer those and who have thought about equity and social justice and racial equity and their role in all of that as educators. So there's, of course, a lot more to this, but we are continuing with this equity as central to the hiring work even during COVID. And I'm going to turn it over to Barb to kind of share a bit more about some of the other work that's been in the works.
Thanks, Barrett. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me just fine? Great. So I wanted to frame the discussion a little bit before I really jump in here and just say that our hiring practices and our efforts to increase diversity of our staff, that this work is grounded in research that has shown that teachers of color help to close the achievement and opportunity gaps for students of color. Our efforts are based on the idea that our schools need to be representative of everyone. And when a teaching staff does not reflect the diversity of our school community, it points to a systemic inequity that needs to be addressed. We recognize the urgency of this work and the slow pace of change that we're making. We're committed to keeping equity at the center. So here we are hiring amidst a pandemic. Given where we are with the remote work and the delay of our budget process, hiring is definitely more complicated this year than we ever could have imagined. As a result, we got a late start with the hiring process. At this point, hiring managers are interviewing, using remote guidance that we've shared, which includes a focus on practices outlined in the Equity Hiring Toolkit. As expected, COVID-19 has created some barriers to hiring. It's also created potential opportunities, such as leveling the playing field, so to speak, for candidates from outside of Maine who previously would have only been the only candidates who were interviewed via video. As you'll see when I share the hiring data in a few moments, we've had some success with our diversity hiring efforts. While we remain optimistic, given the current circumstances, we don't actually know what our outcomes are going to look like for this year. In terms of building our hiring pipelines to increase diversity, I think most everyone on the board is familiar with our Grow Your Own Teacher program called Teach Portland. This effort evolved from work that began shortly after Superintendent Botana joined the district, and we launched our first cohort in the summer of 2017. Over the course of 3 consecutive summers, we consistently had about 40 participants each year. The summer program was augmented last spring in 2019 by a program at Adult Ed called the Ed Academy, and this program engaged new Mainers in our teacher development pipeline program. Over the course of 3 years, we've hired a total of 16 people from this program, including 4 teachers, 10 ed techs, and 2 employees into non-certified roles in the district. We're also exploring a high school pilot program for Teach Portland for this fall, so you can expect to hear more about that shortly. We believe that Teach Portland is a critical component to building our pipeline of diverse educators in the district, but it's just one piece of the puzzle for us. This year, we refocused our efforts on recruiting to increase the number of diverse candidates in our hiring pools. Justin Jensen, who's leading this work in the HR department, isn't able to be here tonight, so I'm sharing this information on his behalf. To name a few of the changes that we've made this year, we've changed how we advertise and recruit for candidates by using social media platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We're increasing our use of alternative recruiting sites to expand our reach beyond Maine. We're expanding our networks to include 11 HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions of higher education. We increased our travel budget to attend recruiting events outside of Maine. Of course, this was prior to the shutdown. We attended a career fair at Harvard Graduate School of Education in late February and a diversity career fair for educators organized by NEMNET, which is a diversity organization, in early March. We're committed to engaging our staff of color in our recruiting process. We see this as critically important, and it's something that we've added this year. The photo that you can see in the slideshow is Rowan Henry. He's a teacher at Portland High School, and he represented Portland Public Schools with Justin at the NEMNET job fair. We've also developed a new kit of advertising materials to support the recruiting plan. This includes the lovely new banner that you can see in that picture, a bunch of updated informational brochures, and a new recruiting video that we rolled out in early March, just before we closed down. So while these items might seem like niceties or non-essentials, the reality is if we want different results than what we've had in the past, we need to take a different approach. We are competing for a broader pool of candidates, and many districts are seeking these same diverse candidates. If we want to attract candidates from outside of Maine, it's imperative that we share information about Portland Public Schools, who we are, what we offer and value, along with all that the city of Portland has to offer. But hiring diverse candidates is not enough. We need to focus on how we create inclusive communities to ensure that we retain all of our valued staff. One way that we're able to do this is by elevating teacher and staff voice through our all-staff survey, TNTP. TNTP provides us with an interactive platform that gives us the ability to pull up and see how diversity, equity, and inclusion is woven throughout our system. The information and the resulting actions that we take are critical if we want people to come to PPS and stay with us. So Barrett, can you jump over to the data slide? I just want to share a snapshot of where we are today. What you're seeing here is just one slice of data from the last few years. We report staff data to the EEOC every other year. So we have pulled the historical data from 2016 and 18, and then it was updated with our hiring season information from last fall. Overall, the diversity of our staff has increased over the last 4 years from 7% to 10%. The bulk of this change is due to the change in the demographics of our ed tech staff, which has increased from 15% to 22% since 2016. We've also seen our teacher numbers move, though less so than our ed techs. As you can see from the slide, the diversity of our teacher workforce has increased from 3.5% to almost 5.5% over the last 4 years. Our focus in the future is to keep the momentum going with our EdTech hiring while engaging more deeply with our teacher hiring. I'll mention that part of this work includes an ongoing dialogue with the Maine Department of Education to address barriers to teacher certification. Before we leave the data slide, I'll also mention that HR is developing new routines for data collection and metrics. This includes tracking the demographics of our hiring pools for applicants, those who are invited for interviews and those who are hired. We'll also be closely tracking our retention data. I'll close the data sharing by saying that while we've had some success, we recognize that this is nowhere near where we hope to be. We still have a lot of work to do. As I mentioned earlier, TNTP is one way that we're elevating staff voice and gathering feedback on how we can take action and create diverse and inclusive communities within Portland schools. Another way we're gathering information on retaining staff of color is through a unique project that we've undertaken with Bowdoin professor Doris Santoro. We're very fortunate to have Doris with us here tonight to share just a little bit more about this work with you. I'm going to pass it over to Doris.
Thank you, Barb. And thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be a part of a community that does put equity at the center, and I've seen that happening for several years. You know, what I'm doing now with Portland Public Schools is continuing some research that I have been doing for the past 15 years, which is studying teacher satisfaction. But here we are going to go even more specific and look specifically at educators of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and their experiences of teaching in Portland Public Schools. Portland Public Schools is like many districts across the United States that are trying to increase the number of Black, Indigenous, and educators of color. And as Barb said, of course, there's a long way to go, but the other piece that is essential that the research shows is that actually, at least nationally, their recruiting is fairly successful. What's much more difficult is retention. And so doing the in-depth interviews that I'm conducting with Julia Hazel and Alberto Morales, two teacher leaders in the district whose names you've already heard, Portland is really setting itself apart in that it's both building teacher leadership amongst educators of color by having them participate in this research, and we're looking in depth, not just through a survey, but having extended conversations with educators of color about their experiences in the district. These conversations are going to help us better understand the professional culture of schools, understand the effectiveness of district equity efforts, and teachers of color also and educators of color also helping us see what strengths they believe they bring to the district that aren't being utilized by the district. What is going, this research is, we're right in the middle of it right now, and so I do not have results. But what I can tell you is that what will be the outcome when I present this research to the district leadership is that there will be difficult conversations where we have to look at cultures of white supremacy, where we are going to have to look at what do we need to do differently and rethink in order to create conditions in the schools that enable all staff to thrive and therefore allow all students to thrive and allow everyone in our community to thrive. My commitment as a researcher is also to help. I did not say I would just put together this research and then let it sit on a shelf, but then I am committed to helping district leadership determine the priorities for what should happen next in order to improve the conditions and to help follow through with that. I am doing this work pro bono. I'm saying that just because the budget has come up. So I want everyone to know that I'm doing this research pro bono, both because it informs my larger research, but also the real piece here is that I'm deeply committed to equity in Portland Public Schools. And I see that this is a place where there is enough momentum where we can really make a difference. I just want to tell you a couple very quick pieces that you should be prepared to see coming out of this research. I think the The first is that there is hopefulness from many educators of color. They see the efforts the district is making and feel supported in many ways. But we should also be prepared to have conversations about how teachers of color feel disrespected, from questions of, you're the teacher, to their colleagues dismissing their expertise and their efforts. We should be prepared to talk about how educators of color feel isolated, how they do not feel utilized, and that they want not just equity for students, although that they recognize that as a critical goal, but they want equity for staff as well. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of moving the equity goal forward in the district. So thank you very much for for allowing me to share this today.
Thank you, Doris, for joining us. I really am so grateful to have your perspective and your partnership in all of our work. And thank you, Barb, for the in-depth people goal summary. So closely tied to people and very much connected to the achievement work as well as whole student is the professional development work. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, though. I do think it's really key because professional development is one of the first places people go when they want to talk about equity, and they say like, oh, well, there should be more professional development, and there should be this and there should be that. But so we are, we have a very robust plan for that, but it is very much tied to all of the other pieces. And so Malia mentioned in her earlier section about centering equity, just the work that we have done with administrators throughout the district, and some of the topics of that were already mentioned. The Equity Leaders Cohort, which is something I have the great pleasure to get to coordinate for us. We are just wrapping up our second year, though it kind of feels like it's a year and a half, not a full second year. Has expanded to 45 staff. We were, that's probably up about 12 to 15 from last year. And the Equity Leaders Cohort is really our training of trainers model, which is supported by the Center for Education Equity, who we'll talk a little bit more about later. But Center for Education Equity have been consultants to us that is available through the Federal Department of Education. They're the Equity Assistance Center for our region. So the Equity Leaders Cohort has, I'll actually go back to the pictures after. So each year we have, a set arc of content that we hope to get to, that we provide as foundation for equity leaders to then turn around professional development training sessions to facilitate back at their schools and programs. So some of the topics are identified here, and those came from the work group that Malia mentioned in the first part of the presentation. So pre-COVID, our equity leaders were right on track. We got to about 2/3 of what was planned as it was mapped out. And they do this work in partnership with the administrators at each school, and really making sure that it is in line and supporting and leading to greater development of all of the school success planning work, as well as these specific topics in equity. So some of these topics were things that were from last year, and some of them are from this year. And schools are, in different places with it. But I have to say, the equity leaders are a really tremendous group of staff in our district. And I always look forward to when we convene. So we have training of trainer sessions a few times a year, and then monthly meetings after school where folks really hone their facilitation plans. They talk about how things went. They get resources from each other, and really kind of share successes and challenges so that we all kind of get better together. Some equity leaders have led virtual professional development focused on equity. I've been able to attend some of those in the last few months. And, it's been really inspiring to see that, because they didn't let COVID slow down our work to have these conversations. And in fact, are elevating some of the issues that have emerged during this crisis of the pandemic. So we do evaluation on the trainings that they facilitate in schools. And so that last statistic is just a summary from this year, which is that 90% of staff report that they agree or strongly agree they can apply what they learned in the equity professional development to their work in with students in class or at school. And so the top left picture is actually the cultural responsiveness work group at the Racial Equity Institute training back in 2018 or 2017. And then the other two photos are from just the equity leaders cohort, different meetings we've had. I didn't get a group photo this year because we would have done that at our last meeting, sadly. And then the final thing I would say about professional development that I think is really key to showing how embedded it is that there are things happening in school buildings and across the district all the time. So we have community of learner events that are, really broad ranging in topics, but like another very popular thing that's been happening has been book groups. So an equity leader might say, you know what, there's 10 teachers at my school that are ready to go deeper, and they might take Ibram Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist and do a deep dive together and read it. Or they might find a little bit of funding and grab copies of White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo and really do that within their school. And so that's something that's been happening more and more that I think is really awesome. Sort of extension of the professional development work. And so to get us into achievement, I'm going to turn it back to Malia Nally and Fiona Hopper for the next section.
Great, thanks, Barrett. So I'm going to talk a little bit about core instruction and its connectivity to our equity work. So core to our approach to curriculum instruction is our learning beliefs, which align with our commitment to equity. Namely, we believe that all students can rise to high expectations, and we acknowledge that students have different experience, strengths, and background, which means they need different amounts of time and support to reach the high standards. So in a moment, Fiona is going to speak about some of the most explicit work we've initiated around decolonizing our curriculum. But before I pass it to her, I do want to call out a couple other examples of curriculum work that is centered around equity, but that may not be as obvious without explanation. So first, we see our math work as central to our equity work. Author Rochelle Gutierrez writes about equity in math and says, quote, "White student achievement levels do not necessarily mean excellence. Even the absence of an achievement gap does not signal equity or justice in mathematics education." She speaks about a more ambitious focus on equity rather than a narrow focus on gaps, which involves excellent math instruction for all students rather than test and remediate structures for struggling students to catch up to their white peers. Examples of the shifts we're making in line with that way of thinking include, but are not limited to, our emerging work to shift discourse patterns in math classroom away from teacher-centered IRE, we say, which is initiate, respond, evaluate, toward rich academic conversations in which students' agency, voice, and cultural and linguistic patterns are honored and valued. Another example is our shift in instruction from procedural skills taught in a top-down, now you try one, or I do, we do, you do method, to a problem-based learning in which students get to do the thinking. As you know, we've now adopted illustrative mathematics across all elementary and middle schools so that all students will have access to an excellent math curriculum. And IM is written with the shifts I described and with the needs of English language learners in the forefront of the author's minds, not as an afterthought. Connected to this work that we're doing, connected to that work is what we're trying to do to lift the LAU plan to ensure our English language learners are getting the right support to access core content and learn English. You know, we did not make the necessary investments in the plan this budget season, but the team remains committed to lifting as much of that work as we can. And I also just want to call out the phonics work as an explicit equity move, ensuring that all students are getting explicit instruction to help them learn how to read. We've heard a call for this most loudly from our ELL and special ed teams for years, and we're thrilled that we've gotten that in place and are already seeing some exciting results from this year. I just got some data today that we saw jumps in meeting benchmarks from what would have been the average last year of 65% to 88% at one school and 75% to 100% at another. So now I want to pass it to Fiona, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the social studies work, decolonizing the curriculum in Wabanaki studies. Fiona.
Good evening, everyone. I will issue forewarning that my internet has been a little bit funny, so hopefully it will cooperate for the next few minutes. I know members of the board are familiar with me and what I do, but for anyone who is in the audience, I'll just introduce myself again. I'm the social studies lead teacher and Wabanaki studies coordinator for the Portland schools. I've been and I've worked at a
Fiona, maybe turn off your, Fiona, maybe you can turn off your camera for a minute and just talk. Sometimes that, sometimes that helps.
Okay. Hopefully that is helping now. I was supposed to be joined tonight by my colleague and dear friend, Bridget Neptune, and I will explain at the end of my remarks why she's unable to join us and also share a statement that she wrote. But I'll talk a little bit about the social studies vision work and the Wabanaki studies curriculum that is underway and the Africana studies curriculum that we're going to begin development on in fall 2020. The primary goal of my work over the past few years has been to tie district equity efforts directly into curriculum, specifically through developing a clear and specific Wabanaki studies scope and sequence for pre-K-12, and then expanding that to an Africana studies scope and sequence pre-K-12 as well. We have done quite a bit of foundational work with Wabanaki studies. That began last year, and the curriculum work began in earnest just this past fall, with the launch of a pre-K-12 social studies vertical team in September of 2019. That team has developed an instructional vision that will continue to ground the Wabanaki studies work already in process and will inform the Africana studies development that will begin in the fall. Both will be grounded in a decolonizing framework that Malia, Jesse, and I were introduced to last spring at the Abbey Museum. We had gathered there with a group of tribal leaders from Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Mi'kmaq, and Maliseet nations to receive feedback on our Wabanaki studies development plans. The sharing of the decolonizing framework, little did we know, has actually shaped and shifted the entire scope of our work in Wabanaki studies and in social studies writ large. I believe Malia mentioned the guiding principles earlier, but to repeat them, they are collaboration, the privileging of Indigenous voices, and truth-telling. And while they come from Amy Lonetree's work about decolonizing museums, they are applicable well beyond museums and Indigenous studies. We have prioritized collaboration with tribal advisors over all else, which means that the curriculum turnaround for Wabanaki studies is slow. The need to adjust our institutional pace and desire for quick outcomes is also part of our decolonizing work. It is critical that we center community engagement, and privileging the voices of marginalized communities is central to that work. The truth-telling, collaboration, and privileging of voices will also lead the process for developing Africana studies. And you'll notice that Barrett included a picture on this slide, and this is a group of 25 Portland Schools educators, including Malia and Jesse and Barrett and myself, who spent two nights on Sugar Island in the Penobscot River last year. Sugar Island is part of the Penobscot Nation, and we were very fortunate to be hosted by 3 Penobscot guides and then several Penobscot community leaders who joined us to speak about their work. And it's this kind of direct communication with the Indigenous community that is central to our work, because there really is no other way to learn about Indigenous communities without firsthand experience and the opportunity to talk one-on-one with Indigenous leaders. Though these opportunities are hard to come by because oftentimes districts don't prioritize them. So I'm so deeply appreciative to work in a school system that values this kind of community building and relationship building work, so that we can honor our obligation not only to LD 291, the law that Malia mentioned earlier, but also to the Indigenous students and families in our school district. We often think of curriculum as a matter of resources, and access to quality materials is obviously of critical importance. But there is much more to it than that. In order for our curriculum to be culturally responsive, to represent underrepresented communities and experiences, shifts in mindset and pedagogy are required, particularly for white educators. In addition to sustaining the involvement of Black and Indigenous communities and communities of color, decolonizing curriculum is also about decolonizing teaching practices, assumptions, and worldviews. And none of this is fast work, but it is critically important work, and it is work that is underway as we speak. Next year, we are planning a series of professional development workshops on creating anti-racist curriculum. We'll be calling on teachers who have taken race in the USA and who have worked as equity leaders to host workshops at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. In these workshop series, teachers will share anti-racist curriculum that they've created with their colleagues. This will allow us to lift all of the amazing work happening in so many Portland Public Schools classrooms so that educators and students can directly benefit from the great work of their colleagues. And finally, I will add that decolonizing and cultural humility have been named as guiding posts in the instructional vision drafted by the social studies vertical team just this spring. Decolonizing and cultural humility are compass bearings, and together they lead to mindsets, pedagogy, instructional moves, and anti-racist practices that allow our system to stop being complicit in institutionalized racism and to start actively dismantling it. My dear friend and colleague, Bridget Neptune, was to speak next, but unfortunately she was unable to be here tonight because of a recent death of a community leader in the Passamaquoddy community of which she belongs. Molly Parker, matriarch of 4 generations of Passamaquoddy basket makers, died 2 days ago in a Calais hospital. She was a very talented and nationally and internationally renowned basket maker, a community leader, and a fluent speaker of the Passamaquoddy language. She died after a long battle with cancer. Molly Parker's baskets are in private museum collections all over the world, and in 2012, she was named a National Endowment for the Arts National Heritage Fellow because of her skill in traditional art and her knowledge sharing with younger generations, including her grandchild, renowned contemporary basket maker, Geo Neptune. The significance of her loss cannot be overstated, so I would ask that we hold a moment of silence in Molly Parker's honor and in shared mourning with the Passamaquoddy community. Thank you. I'll end by sharing a statement from Bridget Neptune. Bridget Neptune has been consulting on the Wabanaki Studies curriculum development since the very beginning in 2017. And the following is a statement that she wrote to share tonight. Bridget says, I am sorry that I won't be delivering this message personally to you this evening. I am grateful that Fiona will share it on my behalf. My name is Bridget Neptune, and I am a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe and maintain very close ties with my community. My husband and I grew up at Madukmaguk Indian Township Reservation and are parents of 2 children who attend Portland Public Schools. I am also a nurse practitioner in emergency medicine. I've been invited to share my perspective as a Passamaquoddy woman working with Portland Public Schools to develop Wabanaki studies. It's difficult to put into words how valuable and impactful this work has been for me personally and for our community. I am relieved to not have to deliver because every time I try to explain how grateful I am to have met Fiona Hopper, my throat ties knots and tears stream down my face. I don't have words that embody that much meaning or emotion. Our tribal community, like others, is mourning preventable deaths of young people, deaths of our elders who carry language and culture, and as I mourn our recent losses, this work becomes more and more important. Without a doubt, I know that Wabanaki studies done right will change outcomes for my family and for my community. I have witnessed Fiona, Barrett, Malia, and Javier's unwavering commitment to develop a comprehensive Native Studies curriculum, to correct false narratives and to eradicate harmful stereotypes and end the pervasive erasure of Indigenous peoples. There's been no shortage of well-intentioned efforts and programs on the reservations. We've seen plenty of 2 to 3 year grant-funded programs designed by non-natives that fail to meet their objectives. They fail to center communities' voices and perspectives or strengths. They privilege their intentions while ignoring our culture and our identities. They are trying to, in quotes, help, they say, but this is not helpful. It's harmful. This inevitably leads to low expectations and mistrust. Portland Public Schools has avoided
Fiona, we lost you
I'll
there.
pick up where Fiona left off. She forwarded me the message. The last paragraph says, Portland Public Schools has avoided those missteps and is leading the state in this work. They have and continue to center Indigenous voices and perspectives, which has earned them confidence and buy-in from community leaders, elders, and young people. This has not been easy or quick. It is complex and emotional. Trust and communication needed to be rebuilt before getting started on tangible curriculum work. This work has been transformative and has the potential to transform education. We will not be erased from our homelands. Fiona, are you back to do the
I don't know, am I back?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Malia, for finishing. And Bridget ends with a Passamaquoddy word, Ksiwuliwan, which means thank you, as a really mediocre translation.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And by extension, thank you, Bridget. I imagine you will watch this at some point, and our deepest condolences to you during this time. But thank you for both for that in-depth update and Malia as well. I actually think it goes back to Malia to put in context the work as it relates to the whole student goal and equity.
Thanks, Barrett. And this I'll make quicker. And so in terms of whole student, much like our core instruction work, we view the work that we are doing to establish and strengthen the behavioral health continuum across the district as a direct equity move. We've talked about this work in the past with you all, and so I just want to highlight a few key pieces and their connection to our equity goal. First, we are doing work to become a trauma-sensitive district. This year, we initiated work with Arabella Perez from UNE, who specializes in trauma-informed work, and who worked with our social work team, and who we intend to have support our BREATHE program and a larger district assessment in the coming year. As called out here on the slide, we also have been having conversations about how not to traumatize students at school. As Paul Gorski calls out, we must attend to the practices, policies, ideologies, and aspects of institutional culture that traumatize children at school. He notes, schools where bias and inequity exist are not trauma-informed. We are digging into our discipline practices and working on a systemic shift to a positive, restorative, tiered system of behavioral supports that emphasize clear expectations, explicit instruction around expectations, reinforcing the behaviors we expect, and providing consistent and predictable response protocols that lead to equitable consequences. Key to this work is the collection, disaggregation, and reflection on data. The data reflection is happening at the individual school level, supported by the PBIS framework and process. And we're looking more closely at data at the district level. Here you see we started to drill down into discipline data this past year and disaggregated it by race, economic background, language, and special ed status. In doing this work, we unearthed disparities such as a higher percent of Black students receiving out-of-school suspensions as compared to white students. This has become a central focus for our work in the coming year. The big takeaway here is that we carry the equity lens throughout the school area and have made several deliberate systemic moves to begin to shift policy and practice when it comes to our work around the whole student.
Thanks, Malia. So we are wrapping up, but as we were thinking about this, reflecting both on the foundation, but that there are also enablers and systems that and practices in our district that allow this work to continue and are ways in which we can hold a mirror to it to continue our reflection. So the Family Partnership Advisory Committee, which is led by Grace, is one of those key things. And I know the board heard right before COVID from the Family Partnership Advisory directly. As Malia mentioned, we're, in relationship to data and the work to disaggregate data, it means you have to have systems that allow you to do that. And so our brilliant data managers and, among others, are working to really make it possible for us to do that work and then figure out how we address those problems. I mentioned before the Center for Education Equity. They have been tremendous partners to us on lots of things, including the policy audit, where they have reviewed a number of policies that many folks on the board, policy and curriculum committees know will be used as part of the ongoing rotation of looking at policies that may need updates and taking that equity lens to it. Some of the other buckets where, that kind of cross the district are, the work of the Food Safety Committee, just the broad embracing of the reality that not everyone has the same things when they enter our school buildings, and this is a problem we can solve. And of course, the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, which has worked to more closely align their goals to ours, including equity. They're just a major player in fundraising that supports all of our schools and have aligned their teacher grants program to equity. And students get their own bucket here as anchors to this work. So I'm continuing with the boat theme because that's what we do. But, really accessing student voice and finding opportunities to hear from students throughout is really key to strengthening all of our equity moves. So the board is familiar, of course, with the transgender and gender expansive students policy, where students were involved in the creation of it, but also the implementation of the policy. A number of student leaders joined me in training staff on the policy and what it means. As Fiona mentioned, and Malia as well, students are part of the content review teams for curriculum, and that work is going to continue. They have been a part of writing resolutions, including the Safe Haven and Islamophobia resolutions in the past. And something that is in the works now that we are planning to release in the fall is guidance related to use of the N-word. Really, this comes both from students saying, hey, we need to have clarity around this, as well as them weighing in on the specific document and providing perspective on the impact of this, particularly Black students. So we have lots of ways in which students are really central to, helping us continue to move this work forward. And that is also, by design, part of the future work. So I will close with talking just about some of the things that are in the works, in addition to, a lot of things that you have heard that are ongoing efforts, like the Equity Leaders Cohort and the curriculum work. Folks on the curriculum committee know that we, just before COVID, presented the idea of drafting an equity policy. Because we have the Portland Promise, which is a strategic plan, we have, used that as a foundation, but believe that it's time to really have an equity policy, and believe that process will be similar to the transgender and gender expansive students policy, where it involves a broad range of stakeholders throughout the Portland Public Schools community. So from parents to students to staff and other partners in that work. Of course, the recruiting, hiring work is going to continue, and we're looking to go deeper around teacher evaluation and how to really elevate equity in the classroom and equitable teaching practices and practices that are, reflecting cultural humility and cultural responsiveness. And of course, we touched on in the whole student piece about understanding our discipline disparities. And so the work moving forward really is about addressing those and what it looks like to tackle those disparities when we are made aware of them and when we make ourselves aware of them. And so the discipline subcommittee of the Parent Advisory Committee is one other path where you heard from them, but that will be some ongoing work related to that. the academic team is looking to initiate a student advisory committee to help support our work on lots of different things, including things like curriculum and this policy work. And we're going to continue to expand the use of equity audits in the district. So I know that was a lot, but it's because there is a lot. And I think with when I look towards the future for Portland Public Schools, I feel like, you know, in light of the conversation that I know, you know, the board has been having and the community has been having, certainly, like, there is a need to pick up the pace, and I feel like the conditions are right to do so. And we have a lot of people who are joining us who are not part of this presentation, but are absolutely part of the fray, who are ready to do the work, to have the hard conversations, and to find more ways to support our young people. So I would say on behalf of all of the staff, you know, we really are committed. And while we have a lot in the works, we are really, you know, excited about making this a long-term and sustainable effort toward the future. So with that, I will close, and happy to answer questions. And I know the rest of the team is here for that too. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you all for that presentation, Barrett, Malia, Barb, Doris. I don't see Doris that often, so I was really excited that she was joining us and we got to hear from her. Doris, strong advocate here, as you guys heard. And Grace, of course, everyone that spoke, thank you for the presentation. There was a lot of information there. There were parts of that presentation that warmed my heart, other parts that obviously made me eager to, you know, bring that urgency that we just mentioned. Let's, board members, if you have questions, go ahead and line them up, use the raise your hand feature. I'm going to pretend to have a question, which usually triggers everybody else to raise their hands. So maybe it won't work this time. While we wait for hands to be raised, I just have a couple of really quick questions, just a few things that came up. During using the equity hiring toolkit, I'm really happy to hear that we're starting to see evidence of people using it and it being effective. So one, and then of course all the other efforts that we're putting in to diversify our teacher workforce are all incredibly exciting. So I appreciate that was a big part of our conversation today. So I'm wondering, this is something that I was having a conversation with someone a couple of days ago, and I'm not entirely sure if I've ever heard anyone discuss it or what really is the sense around you guys who are doing this work for this. But one area of diversity in teacher profession throughout the country is gender diversity, right? So the teacher profession is predominantly a female-dominated profession. Upwards of 75% of teachers nationwide are female teachers, and we already recognize that a vast majority of them are not diverse. They're predominantly white teachers. So is there any data or any piece of information that we've looked at that speaks to gender diversity in education and what effects that would have? Anyone?
I'm trying to pull up data for you. Just give me 1 second, see if I can answer that quickly.
Well, Barb's working on that. I would just say that the awesome thing about the equity hiring toolkit is that it serves all kinds of areas that we are looking to hire people who have expertise on and experience. And really, you know, it's so central to the toolkit is having the people who are doing the hiring be looking at their own biases and being aware of those, because that is such a factor in hiring. And so, you know, just thinking about equity broadly, that, you know, I feel like that falls into a lot of what is supported by the toolkit.
So I don't have it right at my fingertips, but I can get it for you because we definitely have it as part of our EEO reporting.
Chair, are you asking what percentage of our teaching staff is female versus male, or are you asking about the value of males in education? What are you exactly asking?
A little bit of both. So I didn't specifically request the information, but I think it would be helpful to look at a breakdown in demographics, rather gender demographics in the district. But yeah, I think what I was getting to was that, is there any discussion about whether there's value behind gender diversity in the teacher profession? And again, it's just another layer of diversity, and I think it's almost like a backdoor layer of it, because we normally don't try to really. Well, I've never heard us speak of whether that brings value or not, but it just, like I said, came up, and I was really waiting for board members to raise their hands.
I would just say, Chair, that I'm sure we can follow up, but I think what you're hearing is the fact that where our focus and emphasis has been is in relationship to creating more diverse pipelines into educator positions with a focus on racial and ethnic diversity and linguistic diversity, and that there is absolute research, which Barb mentioned, that speaks to the importance and value of having teachers of color, especially for students of color, but for all students. And so in the spirit of trying to focus and prioritize our work so that we start to see some real movement, that's been, I think, where our district-wide emphasis and focus has been in these first few years.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I appreciate reiterating that is the focus. Before I go on to the next board members to questions, I was just going to request that the presentation that we just looked at be uploaded to board docs and available to us and the public as it was happening. I received a couple of requests for that from community members. Let's go to Ms. Thompson, who's raising her hand. Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have a question per se. I just want to make a statement of all the great work and thank everybody very much for all that they've brought to the table and for the expertise that we have brought to the table. And I wanted to comment on Barrett's notation of the broad range of stakeholders being brought together for policy development, whether it be the gender expansive or beyond, the student advisory committee, the parent advisory committee, looking at long-term and sustainability wise. I think that over the 13, 14 years I've been with the board, that we do our best work when we include all of our community and working with us closely, and for all to understand the importance and value. And so I appreciate the great movement that we've had. I think that I haven't seen this much movement, obviously, in a long time. We start, we stop, we start, we stop, but it seems like we've made great progression. But again, I would emphasize and I appreciate the inclusion of the community and all of the various advisory committees, as well as experts like Doris Santoro and others in our community, because I think we all do our best work when we bring many minds together and work from one another. And we may have different points of view, but I think that's what makes Portland Public Schools so special. So I want to thank everybody for all of their work, and I look forward to continuation of this, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Let's go to Ms. Figdor.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this critical presentation tonight. Several of us on the board and leaders throughout the district were able to, thanks to the work of Grace and others, speak with on I believe last Friday with some students of color in the district, youth of color, about their equity concerns. And something that really stuck out to me was students talking about learning the history of white men and not learning history that is relevant to their lives. Not learning about race and politics, not learning about African history. And I greatly appreciate the focus on Wabanaki studies, but I'm wondering what more is being done.
you want to speak, Fiona? Go ahead.
Yes, so that was the part of my presentation, which I don't know how badly it all came across because of my unstable internet, that we're beginning development of an Africana study scope and sequence starting in the fall. That's always been the plan. That's not, obviously recent events make that feel all the more critical and urgent, but that is a plan that was already in the works, even as long as nearly 2 years ago. I shouldn't say that, maybe more like a year and a half.
Yeah.
So there are, I've been collecting and amassing resources and building connections, and there are students from the BSU who are a part of the social studies vertical team. And if I had my way, we would have gotten to do all of it all at once. It's just not humanly possible to lift everything simultaneously.
And I just wanted to add that I think it was intentional that we wanted to start with Wabanaki studies because it was starting with our sense of place. And so just that was a deliberate choice for that reason. And then also mention two quick other things. One, the work that I think Barrett or maybe Fiona mentioned that I think Fiona talked about this, reaching out to teachers who took the Race in the U.S. course, and we're actually trying to coordinate learning from, we have some teachers doing some incredible curricular work, teaching about anti-racism and history and all this. So we're actually trying to help coordinate the learning from each other around that as we build out this sort of more systemic scope and sequence. And then I would say my final point is just an acknowledgement of the tension around process. I think Bridget's comments spoke to this very directly. When I was on, I heard the students understandably tell us that they feel listened to but not heard because they don't see enough urgent action. And I hear that very much. And I hold that in tension with the importance of process and centering people's voice, like, in the case of our Wabanaki studies work, people from the Wabanaki tribes, their voice in the creation of that work. We could certainly move faster if we skipped some of that work, which you hear Bridget speaking to is what has been their experience across the state, and that we stand out as unique and different in that. I was on a call later in the day talking about African American studies with a group of educators and leaders in New England, and Rachel Talbot Ross actually asked that exact question: how are we making sure that we're putting African Americans from Maine at the center of that development process? And so I think this is a good opportunity to just really illuminate the tension there, and try to, acknowledge that that's part of what's at play in our process and in our timeline.
We're going to the next question. Ms. Morioni.
Hi, thank you, Chair. First of all, incredible presentation. Thank you so much, Barrett and Malia and staff. So much hard work has been happening, and it's been moving at a very fast pace, although it doesn't seem like it has been. You've only been with us a few years, Barrett, now, and Malia, same thing. Having been on the board for 12 years, I feel like it's been extremely condensed. Even though we want it to go much faster, I very much want to appreciate what Board Member Thompson said about making sure we're bringing in stakeholders along the way and ensuring that we are continually checking in and having all voices as well at the table to ensure that if we move too fast, then it may not stick. It may not last. It may not be what particularly like our teachers even want to or believe in to teach, or that our students even really wanted ultimately. So I appreciate also, Barrett, you mentioned about a student advisory committee or student advisory group, and I just wanted to ask a little bit more specifically about that and what your thoughts are, what the district's thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I saw Malia unmuted as well, so she can jump in with that. I mean, I think it was certainly something that Malia and I have been talking a lot about just in our work together, but kind of solidified, honestly, with COVID, because COVID presented an opportunity to, to have more feedback from students in a way, because we all are sort of online, and it created some opportunities that I think had us thinking differently about like what else it could look like. And so it's also been, because we are on the academic leadership team and other leadership teams in the district, there's so many projects happening, and we really do want better participation for students, but we want that to be meaningful and not not overly burdensome to them. And so by creating a singular committee that that we we facilitate, we can have the opportunity to have additional dialogue and conversation with young people about lots of different topics, including the curriculum, including who knows? I mean, it could be a lot broader. So I don't know if Malia, you want to add to that about your thinking behind it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that gets at it. I think, I would just add this one point, which is that we have students sitting on our curriculum content teams, but a reflection I've had both from that experience and working with the YEP group is that sometimes we have like one or two students in a room of grown-ups or adults who are educators talking, shop. And that's not always the easiest place, although we've had incredible students who have not been shy at all about pushing and speaking up. And I actually literally today just got a note from one of our high school students asking to come onto the math team. We've always had students on the math team. And so this structure would be all students together, where we're hoping for a really more comfortable environment where it's really, we get to kind of fishbowl their perspective. So it's just trying to have a multi-pronged set of strategies and structures to lift up youth perspective and helping hold us accountable and helping to pave the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just also want to echo what Board Member Figdor said about being a part and hearing around curriculum. And I know it's a heavy lift to begin any new curriculum, and I appreciate you explaining that there is a process that needs to happen. I just definitely want to ensure that that has momentum, and it sounds like it based on the Wabanaki studies, it will be a good model to use. And please just let the board know what you need of us. Oftentimes it means more resources, obviously. But on the other hand, just keep us posted and let us know if that, if that becomes the case. We need to know for sure. But it's a priority of ours, or at least of mine at the moment. So thank you. Thanks.
Go to Ms. Bondo.
Thank you, Chair. This is really amazing. I would like to say thank you for this presentation. It's so powerful. And I just have two comments on the trauma-informed. Just want to know, because this is so critical, because we start from the younger age until high school to try to define exactly what's the trauma around student learning development. So if you can just follow up later on different structure and tools who's going to help you to navigate the trauma-informed. And if some of the board members can be, willing to come and to attend some of those programs, I would like to be involved in that as well. So. And the second one is how the student voice can be the center, because we talking about students, and I think is a time we give a space for the student to speak out, so it can be the student-centered learning on their own learning process. So I try just to see how follow up. You just mentioned about some other students being just, talking to students, but they are not really on the center, on the what you do. They really need to have a space when they can have a participation, engagement on what we try to achieve on their behalf. Yeah. And the last thing is I just want to emphasize what Mrs. Marioni said, and how often the board can be engaged, and how often the board can be informed on what's happening. So we don't need to wait about 3-6 months, but we can have some data and some information longer the way than you're going. So if you guys need help or something, then we can interfere. I think you are really welcome to come, because this is just the beginning of something bigger. Thank you.
I appreciate that. We can follow up. Sorry, Chair Rodriguez, just too quick. We can do a follow-up on the trauma-sensitive work. I think that could be a good, deep dive conversation. And then I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that to the comments that both you and Ms. Morioni made about the board work. I think the support is great. Obviously, resources and alignment to our goals is important, but we're excited that you all have talked about engaging in a process to move through your own equity literacy PD as a board. And that's, work that I'm not sure is been made public. I think that's okay to talk about, but I think that's something that is exactly an example of the sort of coherent, systemic kind of movement where we want to be making, and is something we've been hoping for a while, where you can experience that kind of truncated race in the U.S. course that many of our educators have and now our administrators have, and you all will be able to move through. And so that's great that we'll be able to have some of that common shared language, mindset, and knowledge to work from.
Thank you, Malia. Mr. Atkinson?
Thank you, Chair. So this is amazing and heartwarming work. And as other board members have mentioned, we heard loud and clear calls for a lot of this same work from students just last week. I think we can't move quickly enough on this stuff. And so to the board, I'd urge us to reflect on why we're not providing adequate funding for this equity work. I think we cannot commit to this work with ifs and with whens. We can't hold the status quo investments above the urgent need to invest in equity. And this work cannot wait for new revenue to flow in. And so that means we need to have difficult conversations with the community and think about making difficult changes to the way that we provide education to all students. And so my question is really a rhetorical one to the board. And that is, why is this work happening despite our budget decisions and not because of them? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Mr. Burke?
Whew, I'm just gonna sit on that for a second. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. I am glad to hear and see all this put up front. I look forward to this being out front more and more so. I applaud the way the work's happening, and I want to hold up what we heard at the start of the meeting, some of the framing from Paul Gorski about cautioning against pacing this against privilege. I think the work, whether it's the work I've seen previously in policy work, what I saw at the start of the equity policy work, is very much inclusive both within the district's bounds and within the community at large as it comes in. And I'm seeing that in the harassment policy work as well. So I fully trust that we'll approach that in a way that is anti-racist. There's some tension between when are we upholding white supremacy and when are we being anti-racist. And sometimes slowing down is the thing to do to be anti-racist, and sometimes speeding up is. And it's something I'm learning about personally, and it's something I'm paying attention to in some of our conversations here. I've held up previously to this body the Dr. Bettina Love's work, and there's this one passage she holds up: abolition teaching is choosing to engage in the struggle for educational justice, knowing that you have the ability and human right to refuse oppression and refuse to oppress others, mainly your students. And so when I hear some of this pacing conversation and like, are we going to bring people along? Like, I have to remember who is being oppressed. In Dr. Bettina Love's word, who is being spirit murdered in our schools every day, and who is not. And that does have a relationship to our skin tones. If we move faster to develop curriculum that centers Black and brown people, we are not then oppressing white people. So I'm comfortable in moving forward in those domains and in that work I don't have that kind of frame around it. At the same time, I know we're approaching all this multifaceted work with thoughtfulness and care. And I'm glad to see that we are going to move forward with urgency in our anti-racism work and who we're centering in our work. So thank you all for this work. Looking forward to continuing it with you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Don't see any other hands raised. So I'll wrap us up on this one. If I can just make a suggestion to the board, and I really appreciate the resources that we've shared and our willingness to start doing our own reading and research. I am going to once again offer to the board that we rely on our own resources. As the superintendent said, we have a team of MVP staff members revolving equity work. Go out there, reach out to your multicultural, multilingual department, hang out with Grace Valenzuela, speak to your interpreters. You know what I mean? Use the people that are offering to do the work, the people that are on the ground. They know the families that we're talking about. You know, they know the students, they know the staff, they know the buildings, they know us, and they're gonna share information with you. They want to tell you. They're dying for the board to understand exactly what's going on in this district. There's an underlying level of frustration in some members of the staff in Portland Public Schools with their inability of this board to hear their message. I'm going to try to say this without being disrespectful, but I'm a little bit concerned that after that presentation, after this budget process, after all that we've heard from the superintendent over the last couple of weeks, after me trying to hold my tears back in front of this board, requesting that we bring some urgency, that we're still saying, what can the board do? We step up. That's what we do. I mean, this isn't new. This is not new. The first vote that I took on this board was passing that comprehensive plan, that Portland Promise. That was my first vote. And I've been, superintendent opened up this workshop calling us out. Calling us out. I don't know if you guys picked up on that. He didn't hold back. He was really, really specific about what we need to do, about what making sacrifices means, about what we're asking the community to do. I mean, it was clear. It was clear. It was recognizing who is coming to us and who is having some say in how we run this district and who we're ignoring, or rather who we're not making room for to speak to us. Why are we not going out of our way to listen to people that normally don't have time for these events? And that's easy to recognize, because when I walk into a room, I cannot. When I walk into a room, I cannot stop myself from identifying the makeup of the room. It's an automatic go-to move. It doesn't mean that I'm neither intimidated or impressed by the room or anything, but I cannot help but assess the makeup of the room. Do that when you look at your email inbox, board members. Do that when you look at the list of attendees on our meetings. Do that when people call you. Do that when you look back at who influenced your decisions on this board, what that group of people look like. And now look at all the work that was pointed out in this presentation and the people that were underserving, and tell me how many times we've held conversations with those communities, the people that are at the bottom of our achievement gap, our opportunity gaps, our discipline data, our AP enrollment data, our dual college credit, all those, the bottom of them. How many times have we heard from those families and those community members? We've not. And my guess is that later on tonight, we might not hear from them either. And we have an issue tonight that's going to be incredibly controversial and important for people to come to the table to. So it's, to me, it's that simple. And I don't mean to be arrogant, like I know all the answers, because that's certainly not the case. I'll move us along because obviously I'm not making a good presentation right now. Our next item on the agenda is new business. And we have a first read of a resolution to discontinue the Memorandum of Understanding with the Portland Police Department for school resource officers. A reminder to everyone that is with us tonight that immediately following our board, we will have a workshop presentation and then a public hearing for us to hear from members of the community. Next, consideration and action to authorize the superintendent or designee to begin the hiring process on June 18, 2020 through August 3rd, 2020 for all budgeted vacancies without seeking prior school board approval to advertise. Is there a motion? Ms. Victor, second by Mr. Atkinson. Will the superintendent please speak to the motion?
Yes, very briefly, Chair. This is an annual resolution that allows the district to proceed with hiring during the school board's annual July break. As a result of your passage of this, any recommended candidates that are offered positions will ultimately be brought to the board for ratification at the August 4th board meeting. This is done annually and done by districts throughout the state.
Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Do we have public comments on this, being that it's a personnel item, or is this not necessarily a personnel item? Not, right? Okay. So a reminder to the folks that are raising their hand on the attendees list that this is public comment on the item that we're looking at right now, which is authorizing the superintendent to begin the hiring process for the district starting on June 18, 2020 and ending in August 3rd, 2020. So if that's what we're raising our hands to speak, I'll call your name. Oh, no. There's one person with their hands raised, so I'm going to see if that's what they're looking to speak on. No, never mind. Yeah, I was wondering who would want to speak on that item. Seeing that there is no public comment, is there any, any further board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call, please indicate whether you're in favor of authorizing the superintendent or designee to begin the hiring process on June 18, 2020 to August 3rd, 2020 for all budgeted vacancies without seeking prior school board approval to advertise. The superintendent will call the roll.
Mr. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Balfons?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Figdor?
Yes.
Mr. Bondo's here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Did I skip Ms. Morioni?
Yes.
Sorry. Ms. Trevorrow?
Yes.
Ms. Yangala?
Yes.
And Chair Rodriguez?
Yes. And that passes unanimous with the student voting with the board. Next, excuse me. given that it's before the hour of 10 p.m., is there any public comment on items not on this evening's agenda?
And Chair, would you, we obviously have a workshop following this that will be followed by a public hearing. So I guess just to clarify for people, you shouldn't, comment now and then comment again during the public hearing. So if you want to make a comment about the SRO policy, please do that during the public hearing that we will have after the meeting.
Thank you, Superintendent. Yeah, I was debating whether or not that I should say that, but I was waiting to be prompted by the hands raised on the attendees list, but didn't happen. But yeah, good reminder. So we are about to take a vote to adjourn our meeting, and again, immediately following that vote, no one has to leave the meeting or come back in. We will stay here on this forum, and we will begin our workshop. So seeing that there is no public comment for items not in this not in this evening's agenda, will move us for consideration and action to adjourn the business meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Ms. Victor, second by Mr. Atkinson. All those in favor, please indicate, and we can just kind of wave at the screen. Oops, sorry. Got my video up. Bam. And that's unanimous. We've adjourned at 8:33 p.m.